Twilight is a well-known cinematic franchise that many of us love or at least recognize. Set in Forks, Washington in the early 2000s, these 5 movies offer a thrilling experience filled with romance, vampires, and werewolves, perfect for young teens or nostalgic millennials. However, what if I suggested there is something darker lurking beneath the surface, beyond the movie's cheesy acting and weak storytelling? Beneath the romance of the Twilight saga and its film adaptations lies a set of racial dynamics that deserve closer attention, specifically in how the series portrays the Quileute tribe, reconstructing their entire cultural image and depicts whiteness as the center of its fantasy world. To start, let's talk about Twilight's werewolves. One of the main characters in the franchise, both the films and novels, is Jacob Black. Jacob and his pack are based on a real indigenous nation, the Quileute tribe in Washington state. Interestingly enough, Taylor Lautner, who plays Jacob in the movies, is not native, although a few others are, namely Chesk Spencer, Ailey Mraz, Kiowa Gordon, and Gil Birmingham. One native actor in particular actually goes on to discuss his participation in the films, Tyson Houseman. During his discussion of an Adam Sandler movie in 2015, he states, "First of all, I should note that I am fully aware of the Twilight Saga's problematic portrayal of Native Americans and the appropriation of real Quileute myths and traditions into fantasy. I say problematic because these films offer the image of Native Americans basically as mythical creatures, but they are also some of the few Hollywood blockbusters depicting contemporary Native characters as opposed to fake historic relics of a romanticized early American frontier. Further, I knew that the character I was playing was problematic, and I still did it because it was a huge opportunity." He goes on to say, Indigenous actors face struggles of misrepresentation all the time, from racist typecasting to insensitive and false historical research. Unfortunately, the majority of the roles in film and TV for Indigenous actors are for characters like the brave or the savage, one-linear characters that do nothing but add some color to the background shots or get killed when they foolishly attack the white protagonist. The franchise appropriates Quileute cultural identity and reshapes it into a supernatural mythology without meaningful collaboration or financial compensation to the tribe. It is important to note that although the heavy tourism the franchise attracted was utilized by the tribal communities in a few ways, such as through merchandising and food stands, the interest that has been brought to the Quileute tribe is founded on falsehood, holding them up to be something that they are not. Furthermore, an academic essay written by Ray Elizabeth in 2012 discusses the negative effects that tourism brought about in far more detail. Elizabeth Harlow goes on to explain that many companies and institutions develop products and services that have placed such pressure on the Quileute nation. Some involve the physical invasion characteristic of the first stage of imperialism. Unauthorized tour buses full of eager fans frequently drive through the reservation. To celebrate the Forks-invented holiday Stephanie Meyer Day, news website MSN.com filmed video footage of notable Forks locations in 2009. This included footage of cemeteries and graves of esteemed tribal leaders on the Quileute reservation, all set to Macabee music. According to the Quileute tribal spokesperson Jackie Jacobs, the situation caused an enormous amount of pain and suffering to the Quileute nation as a whole, but especially to the descendants of the Quileute chief, whose grave was filmed. These facts alone show the blatant disrespect and harmful actions that have been brought about by the Twilight series. More on the description of werewolves themselves. The author of the saga, Stephanie Meyer, depicts the Quileute people as shapeshifters who can transform into wolves, an idea drawn from mythology and reinvented for the story. It's not difficult to understand how this dynamic reflects a long history in American media and culture. Indigenous communities are mined for aesthetic and narrative material, such as in certain Western narratives, such as John Wayne movies, while real Indigenous communities remain marginalized. Having the Quileute tribe be associated with werewolves in particular is unsurprisingly stereotypical. Contrary to the Cullens, a family of vampires, Jacob and his pack are viewed as less civilized, from their outward appearance to their homes. The Cullens are described repeatedly as impossibly pale, ethereal, refined, and superior in every way. In contrast, the werewolves are depicted as physically aggressive beings who cannot control their anger, prone to acting on instinct. Even Jacob's character is seen as the other, less desirable choice for Bella in comparison to Edward. This echoes real-world patterns that reinforce a hierarchy that places white, aristocratic power at the top, while continuing to treat Indigenous communities as inferior or as more dangerous. Further, the Cullens live luxuriously. Their father works as a doctor, and the younger ones attend school regularly. That's another thing. Jacob and the rest of the pack are never actually seen attending school. It is mentioned that he goes to school on the reservation, but Bella's high school is the only one visually represented. In fact, Bella and Edward's romance is built almost entirely inside institutional spaces: Forks High School classrooms, science labs, and graduation ceremonies. The Cullens repeatedly enroll in schools. Education is presented as a measure of civility and upward mobility, not simply just that of time. The Cullens are eternal students, cultured, well-read, civilized. In contrast, education is seen as irrelevant to Jacob and the others, who are portrayed as protectors and warriors. Indigenous communities in the U.S. face a violent history with education, especially through boarding schools aimed at forcibly assimilating Native children. Starting in the late 19th century, Native kids were taken from their families, forbidden from speaking their languages or practicing their cultures, with the goal of erasing their identities and assimilating them into Western civility. In this context, it's troubling that in Twilight, white-coated vampires are characterized by intellect, while indigenous-coated werewolves are defined by physicality and recklessness. Furthermore, an interesting concept in Twilight that Stephenie Meyer introduces concerns hair. Specifically, of course, as it relates to the Quileute tribe. Meyer purposefully wrote it so that the tribal characters cut their hair to match the length of their hair when in werewolf form. Long hair on wolves is impractical, so many keep it short. Even Jacob, who is seen with longer hair in the earlier films, has his hair cut short when he phases into a werewolf. This makes sense within the logic of the story, but it becomes deeply sinister when considering the cultural significance and history the hair represents in many Native communities. Across numerous Indigenous communities, long hair has historically held spiritual, cultural, and communal meaning, and can represent identity, strength, connection to ancestors, and cultural pride. This facet, along with the absence and iteration associated with education in these films, creates a troubling picture of how Meyer decided to portray the Quileute tribe after doing very little research on Indigenous culture. That is not to say she intentionally portrayed them in such a negative light. However, intent does not erase the negative effects that this has caused both to the Quileute tribe and to the visual representation and sovereignty of Native peoples. Portrayal of Native Americans in the Twilight franchise echoes many of the same stereotypes that appeared in classic Western films, particularly those starring John Wayne, such as The Searchers. In traditional Western narratives, Native characters were often depicted as a monolithic group defined by their connection to the land, physical strength, and a perceived primitive or mystical nature. In The Searchers in particular, and movies of the like, the fear of miscegenation perpetuates the storyline, as John Wayne's character Ethan Edwards evidently and expressively holds the belief that nothing on this earth is worse than racial mixing. The film explores this through his obsessive 7-year quest to find his niece, not merely to rescue her, but to kill her because she has been quote-unquote contaminated by living with and potentially marrying a Comanche leader. Twilight reproduces a similar dynamic with the Quileute werewolves and the love triangle between Bella, Edward, and Jacob. Like many classic westerns, the story positions the white characters, Bella and the Cullen family, as the central perspective, while the Native characters function as a tribal collective whose identities are tied to protecting territory and maintaining an ancient rivalry. This mirrors the narrative of films like The Searchers, where Native characters exist largely in relation to the conflicts and development of white protagonists, sustaining long-standing cinematic tropes about Indigenous identity. Further, by positioning Jacob's character as the less desirable choice for Bella than Edward, the film reinforces the narrative that Native Americans are undesirable romantic interests. Overall, it's not too far-fetched to recognize the problematic portrayal of Native Americans in Twilight. That's not to say one can't enjoy these movies. I adore the Twilight franchise. Still, it is important to be aware so as not to feed into such stereotypes. Even so, not all is negative with the Twilight franchise concerning Native American representation. As Tyson Houseman states in his discussion, the Twilight movies are among the few modern films that genuinely depict contemporary Native American culture and life, despite the various stereotypes and misrepresentations present. Instead of portraying Native people as a dying race destined to disappear, Meyer, though perhaps ignorantly, includes them in her story to show the tribe as an active part of the plot. Additionally, the werewolves are not shown as villains, which is a clear contrast to past Western stories that often depict Native American characters as antagonists. Now that we've shed some light on Twilight's problematic character traits, I wanted to include a brief discussion of the 2025 movie Sinners somewhere in this discussion as well, since it relates to the vampire Native American topic we're already exploring. I wasn't sure where to place it, so we'll just start here. I couldn't find many discussions on the Native Americans portrayed in the film Sinners. It makes sense considering they only received like 3 minutes of screen time, but even after watching Sinners for the first time, and the second, and the third, I couldn't help but think about that short appearance of the Native Americans warning the white people about the vampires. Like, what did they know, and why did they know it? I had so many lingering questions, and I think that's why that scene stuck with me after so long. Because their presence in the film was so short, there's no concrete explanation behind it. I did find one article written by Sophie Bates titled "Sinners Puts Truth on Screen" for the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians that discusses how Sinners accurately portrays the Choctaw tribe in the film. Bates states that for some, it's the first time they've seen the Choctaw way of life accurately portrayed on the big screen. She goes on to explain that the film specifically hired cultural consultants to ensure an authentic portrayal of the tribe, including connecting the filmmakers with Choctaw actors and artifacts. Even a snippet of a Choctaw war chant was included in the introduction of the film. Filmmakers also ensured that the words spoken were accurate to the language, as were the clothes and appearance. All this to say, Stephenie Meyer and the rest of the film crew who worked alongside her to create the Twilight movies certainly lacked initiative when creating this world of vampires and werewolves, and honestly, showed their complete disregard for the Quileute people. Here are two movies, both of which discuss themes of mythology and otherworldly beings, yet only one pays attention to the cultural significance and authenticity of its characters, even those who receive only 5 minutes of screen time. So, anyway, what's the point of all this? Why should you even care? These are just some cheesy movies that depict a real cultural tribe inaccurately, so what? If that's what you're thinking right now, then you've completely missed the point. It's not just about the cheesy depictions and horrible acting by everyone on the set of the Twilight movies, but also about the blatant disrespect and actual harm done to the Quileute people as a result. Again, not to say one can't enjoy these movies, still, definitely something to think about and maybe sit with for a while. And next time you're watching the Twilight movies, or any Hollywood film for that matter, think about the representation that you're viewing. Is it problematic, or is it culturally accurate? And let me know.